He's going to be talking about the Blue Star Kachina prophecy and other Native American prophecies. And I think that this is a real important thing for us to dive into because, well, as I've shown in my video, that the Hopi prophecy, the folklore, is a living folklore. And it's not something where we're discovering old wisdom texts that have been unearthed after hundreds or thousands of years, but this is a living tradition, and it's one that's faithfully carried on. And I think it makes it very, very powerful. And so tonight we're going to have a really good in-depth conversation. And for those of you who want to join in and you've got questions, and I hope you do, also for those of you who got a question, we've got Susan, and she's in our virtual studio there in the chat room, and just make sure that she knows you're there and she's got your question, and she'll get it on so that we can go ahead and get your questions answered. And so with that, I'm bringing on our guest, Will, and welcome to YA Radio.
Osio Ginali Tahiju, which in Cherokee means, hello, cousins, I'm fine, how are you?
In Turkey.
There you go.
So you're Native American and you speak Turkish?
No, that's Cherokee.
Oh, that's Cherokee. I'm sorry. It sounded like you said Turkey. I just caught the tail end of that.
I talk too fast sometimes.
You must be from New York.
But speaking of talking turkey, we're going to be doing a lot of that tonight.
I really like it.
So you weren't wrong after all.
Hey, there we go. First off, I wanted to ask you, did you get a chance to review that video we put up on Comet Elenin?
Yeah, it was interesting.
Okay. As you were watching it, and just so that listeners know, there's some update on it, and actually I'm fixing to write an article on this, but an astronomer down in Australia has made the claim that the comet is disintegrating.
Yeah, I read that.
Well, he says that, and a lot of folks are happily quoting him, but spaceweather.com quoted his article, and they said, well, that's unexpected, and this is possible disintegration, so they're not sold on it. And the fact is, he is an amateur astronomer. He doesn't have any corroborating imagery from anyone else to back his position or his allegations. And two is, I've noticed with this fellow, he's really, excuse me for saying it, but he's just got a grudge, it seems, with those of us that have taken what they believe to be an unusual interest in a wimpy comet.
Yeah.
But the fact is, when you dig into it, and this is just, it's indicative of the whole story and the thing that for professional researchers like us, well, I'm not a professional, excuse me, I'm too honest for that.
We'll call ourselves yeomen.
Yeomen, yeah,
right.
I like that. Beam me up, baby. And so as yeomen researchers and folks that are just looking at it, we start tracking it back, and you go back to source, and then you see where these things evolve. The disinformation is ripe. It doesn't matter where you're at in any direction. It just keeps on going there. And I'm sure you've probably seen a huge amount of disinformation about Native American prophecy on this as well.
Oh yeah, it just doesn't matter. Anybody that gets involved in this gets slammed every way you can imagine, and it's not something I would have chosen. It's not a path I would have chosen. And even Mad Bear Anderson, who was just revered, founder of the Native American American Indian movement and the spiritual movement that started it. There's some people accuse him of being a witch, so it all comes down to jealousy.
Yeah.
I found in life that, when I was a kid in school, I just couldn't understand why everybody didn't like me, because I liked everybody. And, what can you say? It's, and I've done a lot of things. I've been a lot of places, and by the time I was 21, people looked at my resume and they said, they just couldn't believe all the stuff I'd done by then, so, and then it's just been packing more on top of it. So, there's some people that are aware and out there and doing stuff and got their ears on, and there's others that have their heads buried, So, anyway, so that we're just trying to wake a few people up. You can't wake everybody up. I've been on the quixotic impossible quest now for quite a while, and I heard a story years ago about an old Jewish rabbi who, when he got out of seminary, he wanted to convert the world, and by the time he was middle-aged, he thought he'd be lucky if he converted his own family, and by the time he was getting ready to die, he wondered whether he was going to convert himself. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I understand. It's getting of course. Then again, a lot of people don't realize Judaism probably would have wound up becoming the dominant religion of the earth.
Yeah.
Except for one small question that really just blew it. You know what that question was?
Go ahead.
Okay. Wait, let me get this. I gotta cut off the end of my what? This is before my friend.
There was back in those days, before the Sinai Covenant, there was a place for people that didn't want to cut off of their end of their what. Mm-hmm. They were called God-fearers, and this is the reason why there was a court of the Gentiles around the Jerusalem temple. And these people then, and even now today, there are people that have ID cards. If you're in Israel, you're either stamped ID cards, either stamped Jew, Arab, or Noahide. And Noahides are people who are allowed to sojourn in the land, and they only consisted of 7 commandments, and they were the only commandments that were in effect before Sinai, and it's still a going thing, and it's becoming a worldwide thing again, and there's actually Arabs all over Israel that are signing up on this because their people remember the covenant with Noah, and we're going to be talking about floods and Noah tonight again, and so yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. But there's always been a place for people that didn't want to have any manscaping done and still hang around Israel.
Well, that's going to be a good news for folks living in San Francisco. They got that anti-circumcision thing on the ballot.
Yeah.
And we're all sitting here in California going, "Oh my God, you got to be serious." But anyway, the upshot for Elenin and Hopi prophecy and in general is wanted to get your basic take on it, high level, but also take a moment for our listeners who are not perhaps familiar with your work to just talk about yourself and your background, where you come from. Get a little background.
Well, this whole odyssey started for me. I want to say when I was 16 years old, I was given my Cherokee genealogy by my great uncle, and my mother's people, 37 of them, tried to enroll during the Dawes enrollment period in 1896, and because they didn't live in Oklahoma, they were rejected. But back in those days, the only people that claimed to be Indians were Indians. Now that's one of my mother's line. That's my mother's father's line, and my mother's line. I'm a descendant of Matoaka, also known as Pocahontas, and my 7th great grandfather, I found out in later years, was the war chief of the Cherokee Nation, Speaker of the Council, and I just found out recently he also was the custodian of the Cherokee's Ark. We had an Ark. We had records that were engraven on metal plates, and Joseph Smith heard about them and even came down to Missouri investigating. But the whole thing started, I guess, I don't know, about 19. I've always been interested in prophecy. My dad thought my mom was psychic, and his mom apparently had some kind of gift, and Dad kind of shied away from it and thought it was kind of spooky. But I always paid attention to prophecies and kind of collected them, kept them in the back of my mind. And
at what age did you begin doing this?
Well, in 1983 or so, I woke up out of a dream, and I just heard the word. Of course, back in those days, I was active in the LDS Church. I converted to it in '77. I've since left it because they have left the Book of Mormon. But anyway, don't want to get into a doctrinal thing there, but I woke up, I heard a voice say...
Oh, boy, we're going to get mail on that one.
That's okay. I'll refer people to the website. But anyway, and it's not mine, but I just heard a voice say, when you turn 30 years old and have been in the church for 7 years, something very important will happen. Well, I turned 30 December of '84, and the following spring, I was in the Salt Lake County Library. I used to devour everything I possibly could. I was a voracious reader in Mormon history and Mormon lore, everything I could get my hands on. And most people just kind of joined the church and just kind of checked their brains at the door and didn't do much reading. But it's that way in every church. And people usually are happy just to listen to what their leaders tell them. But I was a badger. I was a ferret. I dug stuff out. And anyway.
Oh my God! You think for yourself.
Well, yeah, right. Well, and
okay.
I was in the Salt Lake County Library, and the city library pretty much had expunged anything that wasn't on the approved reading list. And I went through the stacks and looking for something new, and I've been doing it for 10 years, so there wasn't a whole lot more. Or 7 years, there wasn't much that was new. But after I got down to the end of the usual books and titles, I found a whole section of books with titles that I didn't recognize and authors' names I didn't recognize. And one book jumped out at me. I can remember it vividly. It was just about almost below eye level, and it was called Keys of the Priesthood Illustrated by Bishop, Lynn and Stephen Bishop, and it was published by Review and Preview Publishers. And I picked the book up and opened it up, and it wasn't a publisher that, I started to put it back, long story made short, and this little voice in my head just said, read that book, and I started putting it back on the shelf, and it was like there was a voice screaming inside my head, take that book home and read it. So I did, and I read it, and my wife also read it. It's information we'd been looking for years. During that period of time, Leonard Arrington, who was the LDS historian at the time, had opened up the archives to anybody that wanted to come in, and it was only for a brief window of time that people could actually go to the LDS archives. And I checked, and as far as the church was concerned, it wasn't an apostate work, it was a controversial work. And the upshot of it was, it pointed out that in 1906, in 2nd Nephi chapter 3, it had been footnoted for many, many years until 1906 that there would be a future Indian prophet or seer that the church was to look for. Joseph Smith was looking for this guy. Brigham Young was looking for this guy. Joseph Smith, before his death, was told, and this is in the Mormon Doctrine and Covenants that every good Mormon carries to church. He asked, well, when am I going to see you again, Lord? And the Lord said, trouble me no more on this, but if you live to be 85 years of age, you'll see me again. Well, he died when he was like 39, but his 85th birthday was the last week of December of 1890, and that was about 4 or 5 days before the massacre at Wounded Knee, and the massacre at Wounded Knee happened because, the story goes, Jesus visited Walker Lake, Nevada, the Indian Reservation, which is about 250 miles west, 300 miles west of Salt Lake, near Carson City. Ordained apostles there. Big story. A military reservation, surrounded by soldiers with telegraph. There was a wild excitement that went on. People all over the East Coast were excited about it, and all this information was written up in the Boston Globe. And my friend Robert Ghostwolf actually went into the bowels of the Globe a few years ago before he passed away and discovered things that were never published at large. So that prophecy was fulfilled. And one of Joseph Smith's plural wives had followed Brigham Young to Salt Lake, and she wrote a letter to the editor of one of the Salt Lake papers saying, look, this prophecy was fulfilled. And there was this... by that time, by 1880 or so, the church was just so tired of, they wanted to join the world, and they wanted to put a lot of things behind them, and that was the year of the manifesto, and it was a real watershed year. So it just kind of went right over their heads. And
well, the question though is, when did, without getting too much into the politics of the church, you had this prophecy that they were waiting for Native American. Who did that voice appear, and if so, what did that voice say?
Well, now, like I said, I was just told, look for something very important to happen, after I was 30 years old. So I guess you could say I started this when I was 30, Now you're talking about what did the voice say? I mean, what was the message at Walker Lake?
Yeah. In other words, you said that they were told to expect somebody. Now,
right.
That is something that it's always difficult. Prophecy is always a difficult thing, and I think that one of the big mistakes with prophecy that people make is they start talking in absolutes. And the problem with that is people that are giving prophetic visions, they're seeing one possible future. And, what we have to understand is that human free will changes things. I mean, it's a big reason for prophecy. It's to say you can change things, or you can at least mitigate the severity of certain events.
Exactly.
If you take it seriously. So it always has to be a bit relative. But did you, in your own opinion, come to see this, a fulfillment of this prophecy, or something approaching a fulfillment of this prophecy?
Well, yeah, I really dug into it. I coming at it from the Cherokee viewpoint, the Cherokee many generations ago had a visit from a personage known as the Pale One, who had his skin just kind of glowed, light that glowed out of his eyes. We had a visit also from a personage who walked in. Cherokee used to live in South and Central America. We lived alongside the Mayans 1,500 years ago before the drought that drove us out. But there was a personage that walked in off of the Atlantic Ocean, and we said, "Well, who are you, and what do we call you?" And he said, "I don't care what you call me." And so we just call him the God of Wind and Water. So there's been a book written called "He Walked the Americas" by L. Taylor Hansen, and her father was the co-originator of the Atlantic Drift Theory, and she also wrote a book called the Ancient Atlantic. So I mean, these ideas have been around, but yeah, and there's also parallels in the story of the Peacemaker.
Can you give me a likely targeted person? Is this the one that you've been talking about that was the fulfillment, or are you, in other words, you said earlier that the Mormon Church, was looking for an Indian to make a very specific prophecy. Have you seen that person show up since that inquiry first began in the Mormon Church?
Okay, the specific person that's talked about in the Book of Mormon. There are a lot of qualifications for this guy. And if the Book of Mormon didn't actually say this person is not the Messiah but a branch, you would almost think he would be the Messiah, because he would be accomplishing Messiah-like activities. For instance, all sin ending in his generation or his ministry.
Okay, don't get me into the eschatology.
We haven't seen this guy yet.
Bill, I'm asking straight. Give me a name. Who is this person? And we understand that this is your own personal speculation.
Well, the Book of Mormon just said that he will have the same name as his father, and that he will be named after his father. And because of the way the text is written, all we know is we're about 80% sure his name will be Joseph. But there's also a possibility his name could be Lehi. It is ambiguous. And it is a subject of some debate. Most people believe this guy's name will be Joseph or Jose. As a matter of fact, back in the 50s, there were, or in the 30s, there were two Navajo brothers that were going to Haskell University that visited South and Central America, and they went through all of the ruins before they were dynamited, and the caves systems that before the governments got in and dynamited those. But they met a man. There was a book written about him in the 60s. They met a man named Joseph down in central Mexico, up in the King Mountains. And one of the general authorities of the Mormon Church, Elder Hunter, back in those days, we're talking 1950, 51, was very interested in what was going on. And if you want to ask me, do I know? Do I personally know who this guy is? No, we just know who to look for and what his qualifications are. But he has to be of a very specific lineage.
But this has to be. Hold on a second, though. This is are we talking about Mormon prophecy, or are we talking about Native American prophecy?
This is Book of Mormon.
Okay,
Now,
no more Book of Mormon.
No, the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon does. Go ahead.
Will no more tonight, Book of Mormon, because we're going off on a tangent. We need to stay focused on Native American prophecy.
Okay.
I hate to be a hard ass about
it's
this.
Okay. It's all right.
But we need to stay focused here, and I understand your interest with this and where you come from and how you went from, and a lot of people come to this topic in much the same way. You're not finding answers in places where you're told to find them, and
exactly.
so you start looking somewhere else. But what we want to do, and I know our listeners are already asking from the virtual chat room, they're wanting to know: are we going to be talking about Elenin? Are we going to be talking about
sure, no problem.
And Planet X?
When you ask me a question, you're always going to get the long version. But okay. Yeah, go ahead. Anyway, that's the long version of how I got involved in all this.
Right.
And then from there, I jumped off and was introduced to Grandfather Rolling Thunder, and kind of got into, that was 1992, got into an association with traditional medicine people, looked at it. I looked at the situation both from the Christian angle and from the Native American angle, and started comparing things. And by 1995, started publishing a small newsletter and put information up on the internet in '96, and that's how I started. But the amazing thing that happened was I got a visit in '85 from an Indian. I didn't know who he was at the time, but he just asked me, when are you going to do something about your Cherokee genealogy? And so there's been some remarkable things that have happened along the way, and all that information, if people are interested about this, it's all on my website. But yeah, let's talk about comets.
Yeah, let's do that. That's what they're really, that's what everyone's going. And we have some background. It's had a chance, but now we got to dig in we got to pay the bills, so to speak.
Yeah, you bet.
So, all right. First off, let's take a look in terms of Native American prophecy for 2012. Then look at Native American prophecy as you're finding it for Planet X, Nibiru, and then let's get into Elenin.
Sure.
And so instead of building to that, let's reverse our way back from 2012 and Planet X. Take me there. What is it you're seeing and which prophecies you're talking about from which tribes in terms of, what's coming ahead? And if you're not seeing anything in the work you're studying, just say that.
Well, I started looking. I have always, to call myself a skeptic kind of sounds funny, but I'm careful about what I look at. I don't take for granted things. And when people start talking about Planet X or Nibiru, I kind of almost purposely didn't delve into it a lot, and kind of let the Spirit guide me to whatever it wanted me to look at. And but just about the time I started Prophecy Keepers Radio, which is in early 2003, I was reading through Robert Goswell's website, and he had published some information that the Hopi elders had given him right after Hail Bob came through, which is in '96. And of course, I didn't know Wolf until about March of 2003. And this is how he and I met. I read this account that he had published in one of his books, and if people want to go back in his books, they can verify what I'm saying.
Okay, tell us.
But
one
of the elders told him that 7 years from the time Hail Bob or the twins passed through, that there would be a star that would be discovered. It would be a very, very small star. It would take a telescope to find it. They wouldn't really even be looking for it. And I thought, gee, that's interesting. And it just so happened that I was reading that prophecy at the end of the month of the 7-year period, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. So I went over and got on the NASA website, and guess what? I discovered 2-3 weeks before I found out about this information, a very small red dwarf star had been discovered out about 10 light years from here. Somebody from space.com wrote an article about this, and they can click over from my website at prophecykeepers.com. And this guy was, from a scientific viewpoint, writing about this particular star and commenting on the possibility of disruption of the solar system. And you know, he wasn't saying, hey, it's going to happen. You know, basically he was saying, hey, anything's possible.
Right.
But you know, but I thought it was interesting that he was talking about this particular star. And but what the elders said is that that 7 year, and the kicker was this red star would be discovered when the blue star Kachina was in the sky, and the brightest comet ever seen was Comet Neat, and it was in the sky when this red dwarf star was discovered. I was just going, holy moly! I mean, this is an obvious fulfillment of what the elders had predicted, but all they said was that it was going to be a beginning of a new cycle. So I've been sitting, waiting, going, okay, tick-tock, you know, okay, new cycle, what does that mean? And when you run around with Native Americans, you have to be real patient. And so I started interviewed a couple of mine elders over the next couple of years, and I interviewed Carlos Barrios, interviewed Hunbat's men, and the two of them basically said, hey, you know, we really don't understand all the excitement about 2012 because, you know, we know how to read all of the mind glyphs. The authors that do most of the writing on this subject aren't as well versed as we are, and they really felt people were too married to the date. As far as they were concerned, Hunbat's men, who could really be considered to be a modern-day king of the Itza Maya. I mean, this guy, unbelievable man, and he'd never been interviewed before in the media, and Robert Goswolf arranged for him to come on the show, and you can hear that interview. But basically, he, you know, once we got done, you know, with the interview, he was just kind of joking around about it. He just really didn't think a whole lot about what was published out there. And he said, hey, you know, as far as what they had been told, you know, 15 years either way, you know, there wasn't anything written in stone about 2012. It was just the beginning of a new cycle. But what he and Carlos Barrios did say was that it all depends on how the people are living, and you know, and it could even, what happens on the planet, you know, could even depend on, it could be different for one group of people living in one place as opposed to another group of people living in another place. And there was an echo of that in other native prophecies that I had read. So,
give us an example of those other prophecies that you had studied.
Well, there was, you know, I would have to go into the Mormon thing, but there was a, well, basically, I don't have to go, you know, too deep into doctrine, but there was a prophecy of when things hit the fan, you know, that there would be tent cities springing up here and there, and there would be protected areas where, you know, the sun would be shining and things would be normal, and, you know, life would go on a little more easily than it would in other areas where the people that were living there weren't so nice and weren't cooperating as well. And, you know, Gordon Michael Scallion pointed out that that if there is a worst case scenario, we're going to have to go back and count on living in agricultural units and societies, all things common kind of situations. And I guess he, I guess, you know, people would kind of point the finger at maybe the Amish, or if you're living in a city, you know, maybe take a look at the way the Hasidic Jews are doing things. You could take a look in Detroit. The businesses that are coming back to life are businesses that are being bought up by the employees that were laid off, and you can read. And now I'm a right winger, but I'm going to tell you, go watch Michael Moore's Capitalism: A Love Story, because he points out in there, hey, the businesses that are coming back are the ones that are becoming co-ops. This country was built by agricultural co-ops.
Well, it was built by agricultural co-ops, but I can tell you there's a hell of a war on organic farming right now. So,
exactly.
You know, the thing here, I mean, I'm trying to follow here, and you've got a lot of generalities, but I'm trying to nail down some specifics for the audience. So, as you're what I gather is that there's this ancient prophecy that we're going to have a global cataclysm. Some areas are affected more than others. This is consistent with everything that the other things that we're seeing. There's some parts of the earth that are, a global cataclysm. I mean, we've had 2 world wars. It doesn't mean there was a war in every nation. I mean, Switzerland just sat there and creamed off the cash, for both times.
Well, I think if you really want to get to the meat of matter, I think we're talking about flooding here. And this is
so now, are they talking flooding as a result of a pole shift?
Very possible. When I discovered, well, let's put it this way, and we're going to go. Everything kind of hinges on this information I found out in 2003 that there would be a star that would be discovered, and it would start a new cycle. And when I started looking around at different cultures, I found out that there was a tradition inside the Catholic Church that said that there would be a star that would be discovered, and that their mystics were looking for a certain star. And on that same web page, I read that in the mid '80s, Pope John Paul was kind of buttonholed by some people in Germany who were strong believers in the Catholic tradition, and they were saying, look, the third Fatima prophecy, we were told, should have been fulfilled by now. And he said, and I paraphrase, he said, well, if I were to tell you that entire continents were going to be swept away in an instant by sheets of ice or by oceans, and that billions of people could die, that's not information that would be so much to be desired. And now that was published in Stimme des Glaubens magazine in about 1984. So,
okay.
And I went, whoa, and then I didn't find out that information until after the movie 2012 came out. Well, back in 1991 was kind of a wake-up year for me because my wife and I befriended a fellow by the name of Rocco de Villiers, and Rocco was traveling around in different churches and teaching people how to pray and get an answer. And this is a concept that people pray, but hearing voices, up until 1998, till they made changes in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. When the DSM-4 came out, they said, well, there are cultural differences, and if people hear voices, we're not automatically going to think they're schizophrenic. So the door was open in psychology, to the possibility that maybe we ought to listen to some people. But in 1991, I had already began visiting with the Grandfather Rolling Thunder and some other leaders in Nevada, and I was taught, look, you don't go to an elder or ask questions unless you've really thought out what you're going to ask. And then when Rocco was teaching, when you're going to pray and you're going to expect to get an answer, have a plan. And you need to write down, what you're going to ask for because sometimes, like in the Bible, I believe it was Daniel, it was 20 days before he ever got an answer to a prayer. But anyway, I sat down on the edge of the bed, got real quiet, kind of slowed down my breathing, and I just said, Lord, and asked a certain question. And I said, and I don't want to repeat the question because it isn't really cogent, but the answer to my question was the flood. And I thought to myself, a flood? Well, we were supposedly told that there isn't going to be another flood.
Well, you don't know what the question was, and you talked about
I'd have to go in. I'll tell everybody. I know you didn't want to go into Mormonism, but long story short, Joseph Smith said that someday something would happen and that there would be a migration of Mormons from Utah back to the center of the country, and they would have to take a horseshoe-shaped route. So I just said, Lord, why is this going to happen? And I felt, after a few minutes, it took 5 or 10 minutes, and my body kind of felt like it was starting to vibrate a little bit. And, kind of like, I don't know if you've ever woken up out of a dream. Marshall, have you ever woke up out of a dream and your body was vibrating like you were on a bed that was vibrating?
Well, I mean, yeah, you have a profound thing and it hits you. And so, I mean, but in this case, you had a dream. You just said.
No, I was awake sitting on the edge of the bed.
But, okay,
and my body started vibrating, and I heard two words in my head, and those two words were the flood. And I thought, gee, that's really weird, you know, the flood. And I thought, So,
okay.
you know, over a period of years.
The flood future tense or flood past tense? Okay,
future.
so, and this dream or this incident where this experience you had was when? What year?
1991.
Okay, so you had this in 1991. You're asking this question. All right, and in 1991, you were at this time just getting into your Native American roots?
I started in 89.
Okay, you started in 89, so you're 2 years into it. So you're still transitioning from one belief system to another.
Exactly.
So you're kind of in between. Now let's you know, like in the movies, diddly doo, diddly doo, diddly doo. Let's move forward through time to where you got both feet solidly into it. I mean, the experience that you're talking about, I see this all the time with people who are coming from other belief systems and they're coming into this, and it's the big problem that they have is that if you are taking one message, it doesn't matter whether, you know, what faith it is or one viewpoint. If you say, I'm going to start with this absolute and start wrapping relatives around it, you know, relative aspects to it around it like twine and Band-Aids, then what you got is a ball of nonsense, okay? I mean, you have to come at things and you have to say, all right, there's only one absolute. Things can and do change, period. That's the only absolute in the universe. Everything else is relative. Sure. You know, that's the whole thing. The general theory of relativity asks a simple question. You know, it is about perception. Do I see the time on the clock? Do I see a reflection of light coming off of the clock? Or is the time that I'm seeing on the clock actually when it is, you know, the back of my eyes are seeing it, or when the back of my brain is formalizing, or, you know, the image in my mind. So, I mean, the whole point of it is that it is relative. It is when you are looking at something and things can and do change, they will change. So now, you have this experience in 91.
Right. So
Let's step forward you're going now into Native American prophecy.
Right.
All right. Quit backtracking us to Mormonism. Stick 100% in this. We're not a Utah show. Stay 100% in Native American prophecy.
Let's fast forward to the winter of just a couple of years ago, the winter of 2008-9.
Okay.
I was visiting with Talks to White Buffalo, who was now I had interviewed him on my show several years previous, and I was visiting with him and his wife in East Texas that winter, and I was going through all this information that I was going through with you, and when I told him about hearing about the flood, he started laughing, and I said, Buffalo, what are you laughing about? And he says, what year did you hear that? I said 1991, and he laughed again, and I said, oh, come on, you know, what's up? And he says, well, now this is a guy who's a sun dancer. He's very well known and highly respected by, you know, guys like Leonard Crowdog and people like, Leonard's kids. You know, Leonard's you know, holds the pipe for White Buffalo Calf Pipe, and a lot of the other elders would stop off at his house west of Denver up in the mountains on the way to California. So they had a constant procession of people, and even though they were Cherokee, they were exposed to a lot of Lakota information. And he said, well, he says that year, he says, I was up on top of Lookout Mountain about 50 miles west of Denver doing Hanbachea Vision Quest. And he said, I was facing east, and he said, I saw, he says, you can see the Great Plains. You can see for hundreds of miles east of Denver that way. And I said, I saw a giant wave come across the Great Waves, the Great Plains, and he says it was just like it flushed Denver like a toilet.
Wow.
And so I thought, wow, that's really interesting. I said, because I said Mad Bear Anderson back in '72, he and Rolling Thunder and others visited Salt Lake, and they had a caravan that came from San Francisco, and I know the person that drove Mad Bear from New York. And when they got up above to a certain point where you could see down into the Salt Lake Valley, he made the driver stop. And he looked down at the valley, and he shook his head as he was getting back in the car, And the driver said, you know, Mad Bear, what is it? He said, oh, he says, it's too bad. And she said, well, what's too bad? He says, it's such a beautiful valley, but it's going to be flooded. And so, you know, she drove him down into Salt Lake, and without introducing him, saying, you know, this building is that or that building, he pointed out, oh, that building there with a gold statue on top. He said, the water's going to come all the way up to the bottom of that gold statue. So, you know, here recently, you know, there was supposedly a map, you know, of dubious provenance, I'm sure, but supposedly from Navy sources that,
tell me
that Intermountain West could be flooded again.
Okay. Now, this man that had this vision, what tribe is he from?
Now, that's Mad Bear Anderson. That's,
okay.
He's the guy that traveled all over the world as a merchant seaman in the 1950s, and was the spiritual founder of the American Indian movement. And
what tribe is he from?
Tuscarora. He was a lord of the Iroquois Confederacy. He was one of the sachems of the Six Nations Iroquois. Okay. Very highly respected. He was the medicine man at Alcatraz. He's the person that established the Haudenosaunee passport system. If you've ever watched whale wars, those guys fly the Six Nations flag, and they all carry Haudenosaunee passports. Haudenosaunee is another word for Iroquois Six Nations. Mm-hmm. He was the guy that got the Miccosukee Seminoles federally recognized because he went and talked to Fidel Castro, and Castro said, well, the United States won't recognize them, I'll recognize them, and about 10 seconds later, they got a letter from the Secretary of the Interior. So this man was a very, very influential, very, very heavy-duty medicine man.
Now, when did he say...
I didn't know him, but Rolling Thunder, my teacher, Rolling Thunder, was a very close compadre of him.
Okay. And, you know, the thing here that is interesting, he's seeing Denver flooded. Did he have any time frame on it?
Nope.
Okay, so he just had a vision of a prophetic vision.
Right.
All right.
And now, when the movie 2012 came out, or I knew it was going to be coming out soon, I knew that. Well, I heard rumors that something like this was going to happen. And back in 2005, Patrick Gerald put up a website at howtosurvive2012.com. And Patrick has been featured on History Channel shows and.
Oh yeah, I mean they love him. They eat him up because he's very extreme and very interesting, photogenic, and all of that. So I mean, he's not. No, I'm not saying photogenic in a handsome way. He's an interesting character to put on a screen, and it's very, very intense. And so he's always popping up on these because, quite frankly, a lot of this stuff that's comes on, they're trying to be entertaining, and they can be entertaining with Patrick Gerald because his views are the most extreme in the genre. You know, what he's saying is that the planet is going to stop spinning, all right, and then go another direction. Now, there's prophecy that would, that is going to happen, and with him seeing a vision of flooding in Denver, I mean, I know that 2 weeks, I was in the Loma Prieta earthquake in '89. 2 weeks before that, I was driving home. I lived on the west coast of San Francisco, and as I turned off the freeway and looking straight out to sea, I saw a wall of water coming at San Francisco from one end of my vision to the other, and it was so real, it scared the hell out of me. I stopped, pulled the car over. Well, 2 weeks later, we had the quakes. So I mean, it's one of those things where you see something dramatic like that happen, and something dramatic can happen, but it may not necessarily be exactly what you've seen. That was my experience. But
this is true, because if you go into the dream encyclopedias, and when you dream about a tsunami, there's going to be big changes coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is exactly what happens when you have a tsunami. It is a representation of large change. Now, do we have you delved into Hopi prophecy at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Hopi prophecy says they expected to be flooded all the way up to Third Mesa, and there are some of them that are even building boats. So, okay. Yeah, now this is kind of interesting because about 10 years ago I was watching some History Channel show, and and I can't remember the name of it, and I've gone back and tried to figure out which one it was, but it just pointed out that geologically there's a lot of underground water, and it pointed out that the show was probably about volcanism, and it pointed out that if the Earth started heating up, that this water, the desert itself, this water could come up right out of the ground, and it could be a very large event, and it may have been a show that was talking about Yellowstone. I just can't remember, but I do remember seeing that the scientists were talking about this. I do remember it was History Channel, but it's within the realm of possibility.
Well, you know, I mean, in India, they have this was a few weeks ago, but a city there, that small rural village, the wells all started backing up and flooding the village. All right, which means that you have pressure coming up from below. So, yeah, I mean, you have water coming up. Look at the Olagala aquifer in the central U.S. There's large aquifers in the Midwest and in Arizona, other places. So if the ground is being pushed up, yeah, I mean, there could be flooding from that. There could be any number of things. But what I want to do here real quick, because we're coming up to the top of the hour, and I usually give my listeners a chance to put the cat out and set the tea on. Before that, I do want to address one question that came out of the chat room from MC Mick Outlaw. My question would be mainly, besides the Hopi records and prediction, has another comet ever come close to the Earth, as Comet Elenin looks like it will in modern times? And that's a good question. I don't know that it's, you know, the thing about Comet Elenin is it's really a very unusual thing, and I think, Mick Outlaw, what is most unusual to me is the disinformation that's being spread on this topic, which takes me to another question from Chick Furious. Is Comet Elenin breaking up in pieces, and will we get hit by the fallout of that? Let me answer that real quick before we go to the break. You have one astronomer down in Australia, and I think it was Stargazers. The name escapes me. I was reading on this a lot for the last day or so. He's come out and he has images of Elenin. He is jumping to a conclusion that it is coming apart like S4 linear, and that I explained that at length in my latest video. And I would suggest you know, if you look at the show title, the link is there for Comet Elenin forecast. And you can go look at the video, look at the parallels to Comet Linear. But I want to make a point of saying is that this is another case of grapevine nonsense. Because if you look at how his report is being reported by other sites like spaceweather.com, what they're saying is, here's what he is saying, but they're being cagey about it. What they're saying is that, you know, it could break up and that it's not necessarily expected. So they're being very reserved. I think this one amateur astronomer is without corroboration from other astronomers or observatories. I think he's jumping to a conclusion. Personally, myself, if Elenin just smacks up into a bunch of little pieces and becomes nothing but space junk, whoopee, I would love nothing more. You know, I'm not in this for, oh, yeah, see, there's a disaster. I was right. You know, like, oh, God, I'd rather be wrong and have people having a good laugh at my expense. So the thing about Elenin is that one possible explanation for the dimming is that it's the surface ice that's ablated and come off. And but as I recall, David Morrison at NASA, you know, he's the official poo-poo guy. You know, move along, nothing to see here. But even he admitted NASA does not have good imagery of the nucleus of this comet. So I think that without that imagery, without corroboration, to make a statement that it is breaking up is, frankly, it's just premature. And I think this amateur astronomer is more interested in thumbing his nose at people who have an interest in the topic than anything else. So with that, we've answered that question, and I want you guys to, you know, to fire up some questions and send them in. And we're going to take a quick break now. I'm going to play a favorite of mine, Glenn Miller, In the Mood, because I'm in the mood for some Hopi prophets. And so we'll get to that. So, folks, put on the tea, put out the cat. We'll see you in a few. start kind of giving folks out there a Native American Indian Prophecy 101 and focusing on this present time, Comet Elenin, moving forward into 2012. So, and the big thing here with Comet Elenin is there is the Hopi prophecy. Now, the blue star Kachina, red star Kachina, this is what everyone is really fascinated with. So what I'd like for you to do, William, is from the perspective of the research that you've done, explain blue star and red star Kachina.
Well, this would all go back to 2003. According to my interpretation was that it all hinged on the elders said 7 years from the time Hale-Bopp disappeared, certain things would happen, and they did happen. That that red dwarf star was discovered just 5 or 10 light years from us when the time Comet Neat was in the sky. So as far as I'm concerned, that's your red star and blue star Kachina. But the Hopi elders, I mean, they're so general. They will tell you that when comets come through, they are harbingers, they are messengers. Pay attention to what's going on. But as far as any individual comet, now you told me in an email something about the nephews. Was there something that you had read concerning Marshall?
Well, I've been reading the Blue Star Kachina prophecy, and I mean, it's something where the one thing I see where Comet Holmes has been called the Blue Kachina, other comments, but the way I read the prophecy is that the blue star Kachina comes with nephews. All right, so it's not traveling alone. And everywhere that I started researching the blue star Kachina, it always is mentioning the nephews,
right?
Which would be satellite objects. Although not necessarily a satellite object is going to be something that's orbiting. All right.
Well,
I'm not saying that. We have there's visual imagery of other objects that are moving in a parallel course with Elenin.
Well, okay, now from a Native American point of view, though, now an elder wouldn't be thinking about something that was traveling along with like your nephew isn't traveling with you in time. You're born about a generation before your nephew was born. So in a native mind, a nephew would be something that came after and was closely related to you, but not necessarily something that was flying right along with you. Although, if I went to an elder's house, he would just as soon call me nephew and have me call him uncle if we were good enough friends. So, that's something to throw into the mix.
But from my reading of it, it shows that it's talking about other objects, because the one thing I'm seeing with the other comets that are being attributed, so they're saying Comet Neat, Comet Holmes, but there was no damage, there was no crisis, there was no great awareness. With the discovery of these objects, they fit part of it, in the sense that, particularly like in the sense of Comet Holmes, which brightened to this huge blue coma larger than our own sun for a moment of time. It was the largest object in terms of diameter in the solar system, all right? Not in terms of mass. You take the coma of something that's as large as that and compress it down, say, for example, into an iron ingot that'll be about the size of a large suitcase or small steamer trunk. But still the same, though. I mean, that is a sign. I agree, it's a harbinger. But when I'm looking at the blue star Kachina and the red star Kachina prophecies as they're written and published throughout the web, as a researcher in space threats, to me it says a very, very clear message. One, there are multiple objects that are be attended with the first comet, or the first Kachina, which is the blue star Kachina. That is then followed by the second. So, for example, earlier you were telling me that there was this discovery of a red dwarf at some distance, and then there's a comet. So, I mean, it's then what you've just said is out of order.
Well,
with
now
prophecy
this is, like I
itself?
said, this is what go ahead.
How do you, I mean, what you just said was out of, which comes first, the red or the blue?
Well, what the elders told Robert Ghostwolf was that the blue star Kachina would be in the sky when the red star was discovered.
Okay.
And that's the way it happened in March of 2003. But all they said it meant was it would be a beginning of a new cycle.
Okay. So now these elders, are these Hopi elders or of another
These are
tribe?
the same elders that Robert Ghostwolf had on the Art Bell show.
Okay. But I mean, are these elders, what nation are they from?
Hopi.
Okay.
Yeah, they went on. They didn't reveal their names. He got them on there twice when Art Bell was still broadcasting, and because they were threatened. And you can read the transcript of at least one of those.
Who threatened them?
That I don't know, but they were threatened. You know, there's I mean, I've gotten threats. You know, and I've got a lot of slander. It's just, and it's all about racism. Even though the Hopi elders and elders from a lot of other nations have said that now is the time to reveal the prophecies, now is the time to heal together with white people, there is still so much residual racism that you've still got a lot of Native people who just hate white people, and they don't want these things revealed. They don't want this information put out. And these are the people that slander people like me and other people that are revealing these things, even though these senior elders from back in the 70s all said, hey, it's time to start talking. And they started fulfilling these prophecies back in the late 60s and 70s, and there are those that regret it or resent it, and there are those that do make threats. And
so the threats are then coming from the Native American community itself?
Yes, yes.
All right.
A few people.
All right, so a few people are getting angry about it, and they want to suppress the dialogue. They don't want to, when you stop to think about how much the Indians have suffered at the hands of, history and with everything that's gone on, I can understand that resentment. But, let's not focus on the sour grapes guys. All right? I mean, they're not, they may be mad, they may be making threats, but on the other hand, they're not wrapping bomb belts around themselves and walking into, restaurants with women and children, okay? I mean, that's one of the things that as an observer, I look at it and I go as a credible source. And to me, a society that, idolizes death and turns to violence so easily it's questionable. I mean, everything that they're putting forward is going to be questionable because it's obviously going to a negative agenda.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find with the Native American prophecy, and with elders in particular, I'm not talking about young guys that are just pissed off about history, okay? I mean, and hey, we don't have to go far to find them. You want skinheads? Fine. There's places you can find skinheads. Whatever you want to find, some angry young guy, doesn't matter. I mean, there's someone out there that is angry about what happened. But I like to focus on the elders. And the thing of it is that, if you're saying that for the elders, then the blue star and the red star Kachina have already been made to them. And, you have this, you have a red dwarf. It's been out there. It's a brown dwarf, and it has been discovered, and they have since discovered many more. This is, as a type of sun, it's something that is just now emerging into the field, and they're learning a lot about them, and they're going out and they're really looking like crazy for them. I mean, I can remember a time when the Holy Grail of astronomy was resolving the issue of the Big Bang. Will the universe at some point start contracting after gravity overtakes the expansion and brings us back into singularity, and that's it. We're all singing, is that all there is? And now they're going, well, no, it just seems like it's just expanding and it's just going to keep doing that, and then our stardust is going to merge with the stardust of other galaxies that have gone the same way. So the emphasis now is really on finding extrasolar suns and planets. And I'm finding that this, there's a tremendous interest here. Now, it makes a lot of sense if you think about when is a good time to start looking for a new Earth. If you know that our Earth is going to be looking at some hard times and that we have got to get our species to other worlds, we've got to get off planet. And so if you are finding extrasolar Earths or candidates for an extrasolar Earth, then the next thing is going to be is you're launching probes to go out and, see what's happening. But in the meantime, it's at some point you're going to have to build arcs to carry people. So,
funny you should say this, and when you get done, let me elaborate a little bit.
Well, go for it.
Well, Grandfather Rolling Thunder told me that we migrated here from Mars. Now, when I heard that, I thought, okay, that's really interesting. But when I years later, when I read L. Taylor Hanson's book, The Ancient Atlantic, I was reading an account where she had befriended an Apache elder and happened to be showing him an alabaster box. And he took great interest in the box, and he said, "Well, he says, may I see it?" And he said, and he opened it up, and he says, "Where is the red earth that was in it?" Because his name was Asa Delugi, and she said, "Well, I don't know." She said, "Apparently, whoever discovered it discarded it." And he said, "Well," he says, "that's really unfortunate because he had seen other such boxes and that they contained red soil from the old red land that we migrated from."
What? In other words, we migrated from another planet.
That was the implication that I read into it, and it also lined up with what Rolling Thunder told me that he had been told by his teachers that Mars had burned up its own resources, and that we migrated here at some point.
Well, there's the interest in Mars is phenomenal. There's a lot of images of, definitely what looks like old structures. There's one of a spaceship, and it really does. It would be hard to say that it's a geological structure the way it's designed. So yeah, there are a lot of folks that really do subscribe to the notion that there was a life on Mars, and the question is it got here. You have in the Hopi prophecy, there's a mention of the ant people, and that has always been of interest to me. What are you finding in terms of the belief that we are going to see extraterrestrials again during this? Because that seems to weave through when you read the Blue Kachina prophecy. It seems to be very strong in there that this event is going to be attended by contact.
Well, when I interviewed Thomas Mills, and you can go and listen to that interview at prophecykeepers.com. Thomas wrote a little book called The Truth. Thomas grew up, I believe, in Holbrook, Arizona. And the Hopi back in the 60s used to come down with their horses and wagons, and they knew that they were welcome at his mom's restaurant. And so even though they were welcome to come inside, they would wait outside for her to fix sandwiches and bring ice and so forth. And when they got federal funding to build a cultural center, they invited his mom to run it. And Thomas and his mom moved up to Hopi, and he spent a lot of time out on the roof of the cultural center being taught by the elders. And what they taught him was to take a look at the animal symbols on the Giza Plateau. And they said, you'll notice all over Egypt there are hieroglyphs, but the Giza Plateau, you don't see hieroglyphs, but you do see animal symbols. And those animal symbols are the same symbols that are very important to the Hopi religion. And they pointed out there are 8 pyramids on that plateau. And what they had been taught was that, as odd as it may sound, was that the Creator was going to give the people of Earth 8 chances to, and I know this sounds weird, but physically balance our planet. And this is what pyramid building was all about, and the reason why pyramids were basically built along the same latitude. And now this resonated with me because the person that introduced me to Grandfather Rolling Thunder was Zula Brinkerhoff, and Zula, going back to the late 50s, had been she was a mixed blood Cherokee. At one point had served as secretary for the governor of Utah, but she was an official spokesman for the traditional Hopis and had been adopted by the keeper of the David Monongi, who was the keeper of the Hopi prophecy. So, and they had always they told her that they believed that that they migrated here from the Middle East. And her book, God's Chosen People in America, that was kind of the thrust of her book, was the similarities, between the two cultures. And Robert Morningsky some years ago published the startling similarities between the Hopi language and the Sumerian language. And
now that's interesting. I have a question, and I want to get into that.
Well, and the Semitic culture came out of Sumer. So go ahead.
Right, it did. And you said that there were these pictographs of animals on the Giza Plateau. What specific animals were they referring to?
The only one that really sticks in my mind, because it's been 6-7 years since I did the interview, and you can listen to it, but I believe hummingbird was one of them. Okay. And that's the only one that really sticks out in my mind.
So they're seeing, the Hopi elders here are seeing a connection between the Hopi here and the Hopi are principally up in, I think, up in northern Arizona.
Right.
But they're seeing a connection back to the ancient Sumerians, which that is, for those of you out there who follow Zecharia Sitchin, the Sumerians are the ones that he was following and translating their work, and that's where a lot we know about Planet X comes from. So if they've got this in connection with the ancient Sumerians, all right, what are the Hopis saying about, first off, do they use Nibiru? Do they have a name for the object? Do they discuss this object, which is, at great length discussed in the works translated by Sitchin?
Well, the only real threat that they really, if you want to take it as a threat, was this red star. They named it Sasquatch, the Destroyer. So that's...
give me that again.
It's spelled Sasquatchuh, as I recall. Sasquatch.
Right. Okay. And that translates to what?
The Destroyer.
Okay. Do you know who else uses the term the Destroyer?
Enlighten me.
Okay. This is, if you can get this in the Colburn Bible, we published the ancient Egyptians after the Exodus wrote about this object. They always called it the Destroyer. And if you read the ancient Hebrew, the Torah, all right, which is the first part of the Old Testament, and in that you have a direct translation, not a transliteration from other languages. But the ancient Hebrews also called it the Destroyer. So both the Egyptians and the Hebrews called it the Destroyer, and the thing is that this is the last time it appeared was the 10 plagues of Exodus, according to the ancient Egyptians. So now we have this interesting, we've kind of been meandering through the interview looking for a nugget. We got a nugget. Now I see a direct connection between the ancient accounts of the last flyby of Nibiru or Wormwood or Frightener. I mean, there's some estimates are like 50 different names. To me, it's an amazing thing. It keeps popping up in folklore, and we keep finding it. So now here, boom, we've got a solid connection to the Hopi, the ancient Hebrews, and the ancient Egyptians, all who call this object the Destroyer.
Right, and this is that
you
thing that was
just told me about that the Hopi have this connection to the ancient Egyptians. Correct?
That's correct. That's correct. They know that they migrated from a certain place, and they know that they're going to have to finish the migration by returning to that place. And my last Cherokee traditional teacher was a fellow by the name of John Red Hat, and he back in the '60s started visiting the Hopi elders. Kind of got his attention. He got their attention because they were looking for someone who would wear a red hat or cloak.
Mm-hmm.
And over a period of about 30 years, now he's passed on now, but as far as Mike Lanza and Mina Lanza and their son Chief Mike, who were the last three village chiefs at Oribe, and remembering that the Hopi prophecy revolves around Oribe, as far as they were concerned, he fulfilled every single prophecy having to do with the true white brother, except for the return of the corner of the Sun Clan tablet.
Okay.
Now they gave Chief Mike, before he passed away, gave pottery shards to an associate of John Red Hat, and she has them.
Okay.
And those pottery shards were at some point, when she was directed by Spirit to be taken back to a certain place in the Middle East and scattered on the ground. And because the Hopi look at pottery as being a representation of the ancestors themselves, it's just as good as a full return or the ending of the migration by returning those shards back to the place where they say they originated from. Mm-hmm. Now, they're not the only ones that say that they migrated across the Eastern Ocean. We can get into that if you want to also.
Sure. You know, I mean, it's we have one question here, though, from the virtual chat room. I want to throw it at you.
Sure.
Susan tossed this one over through the transom. This is from TechHead 123. Are the Hopi connected with the ancient Sumerians?
Well, according to, if you'll put in the words Robert Morning Sky, and then the word Sumerian and the word Hopi on a Google search, you'll come up with a page that will show you a direct correlation between the Sumerian language and the Hopi language.
Okay. Well, what is that, just for the listeners?
Well, I can't remember. It's been some time since I looked at it, but he shows 10 or 12 direct, very obvious that the Hopi language and the Sumerian language equal certain concepts with very, very minor linguistic difference. And but like I said, it's been so long since I read it. I just remember that Morning Sky put that information up. It's been up on the internet since 1996. Okay. So that's findable.
Okay. So then they can go in and dig up on that. When you're
and if anybody wants to email me, webmaster@prophecykeepers.com. You know, I'm not at my computer right now, and be glad to give them pointers or links to anything.
Okay, that's helpful. And the link to your site is up there on the show announcement, so it'll take them right to your site, and they can connect with you directly there. Now, let's look at, in terms of where we're at right now, with what the Hopi and other tribes are doing at this time.
Well, they're dancing and they're praying. The people that I'm in contact with, a lot of them are sun dancers, and these people, if you go to a sun dance, sometimes really amazing things happen there. I'm talking about whirlwinds, and they've known for some time that things are going to be happening. Now, these wildfires that have been sweeping the plains, my friend Jimmy Ten Rivers of the Membranio Apache out in Walsenburg, Colorado, I met him back in January 2008, and he was telling me about a friend of his who was a Lakota that lived nearby him, that his elders had told him that there would be great changes coming right after wildfires swept the prairies, and they've had tremendous wildfires this last year, as you'll recall. And so they were to look, what they were to do when they saw these wildfires sweeping the prairies was to prepare a place for elders to come and sit down and talk together and make plans. And this is what they've been trying to do with very meager resources. And but just the idea of knowing what to do and when certainly is helpful, because when you start getting into native prophecy, a lot of it is pretty general and pretty ambiguous and, like herding cats. But that is a direct, that's something that's happening now, if that's helpful.
So, I mean, what exactly are they planning for and preparing for?
Well,
major earth changes, obviously.
Just getting ready for disasters, getting ready for trying to figure out a way to house people and feed them. And at this point, coming to a meeting of minds is really important, because with the federalization of tribes at the beginning of, in the 1930s and 40s and going forward, there's been a big split in Native America. The tribes that have money look down on the tribes that don't. And but Madbear Anderson said that, oddly enough, a prophecy that he published years ago, he said that after it talked about a red snake, a white snake, and a black snake. And he said that the white snake would arrive here, and that the native people would watch as the red snake came over the poles and engaged the white snake in a battle for some period of time. And of course, this is the Indian people are standing back watching this battle, and they said at some point a black snake would swim out of the ocean and would kind of change the picture of things to the point where both the red and white snake would be fighting the black snake, and they would be engaged in a battle for quite some time. And eventually that they would be driven back into the ocean and would swim away and would never, trouble the people here. But they said at that time that the native people would be released from their reservations, and that they would get together in the hilly country and burn tobacco and get to know each other again. So I'm kind of looking at the economy, and if you go into President Obama's speech, he talked about breaking up tribes. If the federal government fails, there's not going to be any more money. There's not going to be federally recognized tribes that have got money to lord over the tribes that chose, or the small pockets and groups of people that chose not to get involved with the federal system. So I see this as a failing economy. Of course, the white snake being white people, the red snake being white people associated with communism. And I see the black snake. I never really understood what the black snake was going to be till this whole thing started happening with Muslim extremism. If that helps. If my answer is getting too long, just let me know. But
we have this, but also in the back of my mind, I had something earlier that you said about their dancing, right? They're dancing now.
They sure are. They're starting to ghost dance again too.
They're starting to
which
ghost
is very
dance.
Important.
Now, my reading of the Blue Star Kachina prophecies, when the Blue Star Kachina appears, that's when the dancing stops.
Yeah, they said that at some point all Hopi ceremonialism will stop, and that they will really begin a new religion, a new way. They'll actually leave from where they are in Arizona and go to the Four Corners area and start a new tribe with the remnants of whatever people are still around and still willing to cooperate and get together and do things.
Okay, but if this is then part of the Blue Star Kachina prophecy, that when this object appears, that the dancing stops, all right, then if the dancing has not yet stopped, that means the Blue Star Kachina has not yet appeared. So to say it's Comet Neat or it's Comet Holmes, it's something that would look like it, But if they're dancing, how could those other two comets be the blue star Kachina?
Well, now they didn't say they were going to stop dancing. What the prophet said was Hopi ceremonialism would cease.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Hopi ceremonialism is something completely different from saying, you know, just getting together and dancing. It's
how so?
Well, the Hopi religious system is something that's completely unique from the system of all the other nations, and so I wouldn't go to that place and say that they're going to stop dancing, if you know what I mean. I don't.
But the ceremony, in other words, the point here, Bill, is that they're dancing, and they're still dancing right now. So the question then is, how does the prophecy work if if a key concept in that prophecy is that the dancing stops, or even the ceremony stops? So you still have the ceremonies, you still have the dancing. This hasn't stopped. So
well, what has stopped? There were some things that happened a few years ago where there were Hopi sacred items that were stolen from the place that they were hidden.
Mm-hmm.
And these items were associated with the rites of passage that Hopi men had to go through
mm-hmm.
in order to be considered men. And of course, the whole interest in Hopi ceremonialism has waned. So it's winding down.
Even if it's winding down, it's, you know, a car can go 80 miles an hour, it can go 8 miles an hour. Either way, the car is still working and moving and going down the road. So if the ceremonies and the dances have throttled back to even 10% of what they were, they're still doing it, which means that blue star Kachina has yet to arrive or to announce itself. We haven't seen that sudden unmasking that makes everybody go, whoa.
There's to be an event. I was told that the exact timing of this had to do with a sighting through a certain hole in the roof of a certain kiva, and that this would be the fulfillment of the blue star Kachina dancing above the plaza. You're familiar with that point in Hopi prophecy, and that would be the end.
Okay.
As far as I know, that particular event has not happened yet. And this had to do with a specific astronomical sighting through a certain keyhole in a certain kiva. I have not heard of any such thing happening.
Well, you know, I've heard of this kiva as well. I remember researching this from a couple of years ago. And what I gathered on it when I was checking with sources was that there was this very specific celestial alignment that they were actually, what they were doing is observing Venus. And specifically what they're looking for is Venus being in a specific part of the sky and doing a double retrograde motion. All right? And, you know, a retrograde motion, the planet looks like it's backing up. And that's really not the case. It's just the difference in our orbit and their orbit, and that makes that visual look. But when they're looking out to that specific area, and we were really fascinated with that, and so we were wondering when that alignment would happen. And in that particular part of the sky, it turned out it dated for December 21, 2012, or thereabouts. You know, it was in the 2012 time frame that we're going to see this. 2012 astronomically is a very, very interesting year. All right, and there's you know, what's happening there. It is something where if you have a special kiva and it is designed to look into a specific area of space, then yes, if you're looking out that kiva and you're looking out that portal, you're going to see the double retrograde of Venus, which is only going to happen in 2012. all right? And it won't happen again for a long, long time.
Well, one other hint I picked up from out of the Bible, Jesus at one point, maybe it was in 24th Matthew, he said, pray that your flight not be in winter or on the Sabbath. Well, check your calendar, because guess what? 21st of December 2012 is on a Sabbath, and it's the first day of winter. So I don't know what that means, but I thought it was interesting when I actually looked at the calendar. And sometimes things just occur to me to go take a look, to look for a parallel, and that one popped out at me.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that we find these coincidences and corroborating links between different prophecies, different belief systems, different peoples. And I always find it to be really, really interesting. With Comet Elenin, we got some code tables from the Torah Code research team. And for the listeners, difference between Torah Code and Bible Code, as in Michael Drazen's book, is Drazen really is working in a smaller subset of the greater overall Torah Code research, which is more of a team effort and dates back nearly 1,000 years. In this particular case, what they're finding is that Elenin is, there's a table that I've received that puts Comet Elenin and Planet X together, and it is telling us that around the 18th of this month that we're going to see an incredible brightening of Elenin. So earlier in the show, we're talking about, they're saying, well, Comet Elenin is getting ready to come apart. That is only at this point supposition. Yeah, I mean, comets do fly apart. We do talk about linear, which is a very, very good example, and there's a lot of detailed information on that in the video. But if this is the case, Elenin is the blue star Kachina harbinger, all right, that is something that could happen very, very soon. And it was interesting because the Torah Code researchers found not one but two tables. But one table, we're studying it quite at length, is it's a very, very tight table. They still have to do the casino testing on it, which is just to see statistically if it could stand up as not being monkey text, that you couldn't go and find that same thing somewhere in, Gone with the Wind or some other kind of book. And debunkers like to do that, although their stuff is, they can do a little bit of this, a little bit of that to illustrate the idea. But the problem is you can't take their debunking and consistently apply it so that you actually see, that same thing happening time and time and time again. They get a few lucky hits, and that's it, and they don't think any further about it. So we're seeing that. But let's say Comet Elenin does turn out to be the blue star Kachina. And I think to say that this comet is going to do any one thing in particular, I just can't do that. The research team we're working with, none of us can really do that, because this story is evolving like crazy. And frankly, I have never seen a topic get so fouled up with so much craziness and disinformation as Comet Elenin. And I am going to tell you, it's like, they're going, it's crazy kids and trolls and this, that, and the other thing.
No, but where there's smoke, there's fire. I have always looked at where there's a lot of consternation, look deep. Now, with this vote coming up in the UN next month, having to do with the Palestinians in Israel, with Elenin in the sky.
There's a Torah table on that too, interestingly enough.
Well, when this red star was discovered back in 2003, I didn't know until I read this article just a couple of weeks ago about this guy in space.com that it was discovered in the constellation of Aries. And when I heard that, I went, wow, because some years ago, some astronomer did some work, winding back the cosmos to about the time when Jesus was born, and he did find in it's either 6 BC or 6 AD, and by the way, those were years when Roman censuses were taken. In that year, there was an event in the constellation of Aries that would have gotten attention of astronomers or astrologers, because Aries, according to him, was the constellation that had to do with Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So when I read about this red star being discovered, and I went, oh wow, that's kind of interesting, especially what's going on. But I knew something was up last year. I've got a friend in Israel who's a Levitical priest, and I had a dream last year. I told him, I said, and I sent this to him, and I said, wow, I said, I don't know what this means. I said, but I had a dream where I saw hundreds and hundreds of jet airplanes flying all over Israel, just doing aerobatics and flying upside down and sideways and in every possible direction. And I said, Rabbi, I don't know what this means, but I said, something's up. And, of course, if you go into dreammoods.com and you dream about jets, there's going to be a very quick change.
Mm-hmm.
And now here we've got, the Arab Spring. And so, my dreams were indicating something was going to happen, and something is happening. There's a great change going on there.
Well, I mean, there is, we do have a new Torah code table, and it's something I'm going to be doing an article on this. There's a lot of deep information for the readers. But if you look at what's happening right now with Syria, the concerns are that Assad is going to, just to save his own tuchus, he's going to trigger a war. Probably, to go after Israel. It's like, okay, marshal all the, everybody get behind it, and, it's the old enemy of an enemy is a friend of mine thing. And, that is a real justifiable concern. Because here in September, we also have this vote coming up in the UN that the Palestinians are trying to push through. And so the question is going to be is that, they'll probably get what they want on the general floor, but will they get it past the Security Council? Specifically, will the U.S. Go for it and just say, we'll give the nod for the statehood? Or is, and this is, to me, going to be a very interesting test of Obama. We're going to see, exactly where Obama sits on the issue, because he hasn't proven to be a tremendous good friend to Israel. And so, they definitely miss Bush. They miss the Bush family more than Americans do. But, he could, we look at the timing on all of this. And, this month could...
Convergence, all kinds of things are converging. And we're in September, September, October, the days of awe, these are the time when things happen in Israel. It was just to take a cursory look at the Hebrew calendar, and they always know when something's up because it's going to happen in the fall. And but what really concerns me, if you're talking about Syria, well, Damascus is specifically mentioned in the Bible as a city that will be completely destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And the other spooky thing, if you want to call it that, I don't know if it's kind of an esoteric prophecy, but the very week of the financial crash back in 2008 was the end of a 2,732-year decree against the northern kingdom of Israel. This is the mythical 10 lost tribes that went into the North Country, and the rabbis have always known where they went. They went north. Some of them went to Afghanistan and into India and other places, but they also went into northern Europe and spread out all over the globe. And there is a prophecy that talks about the eagles of Ephraim, becoming the protector of Israel, the most powerful military power on the planet. And so it looks like if you take a look at it, the way it looks like that's the way it happened. And but it just things are popping, and this next year is going to be really interesting.
Now, the Hopi do not have. We see from the Mayans, and we see the end of the calendar, current calendar, and then there's another calendar that starts. That much we know for sure. But Terence McKenna also found that other calendars end in the same time, and also the I Ching, which is what Terence McKenna really, that was his big discovery. So, do the Native Americans, any of the nations, do they have some sort of calendar system that would seem to be ending in 2012 as well?
Well, the Raven Hale wrote a book some years ago discussing the Cherokee way of timekeeping, and it's basically the same as the Mayan, with the Venus cycle. And remember that we lived alongside these people. You can go to CherokeeDiscovery.com and you can read about some of the information about how the Cherokee lived alongside the Mayans. And but that final Mayan glyph, showing them pouring out this huge vase full of water, and the coming of the age of Aquarius and the end of the Mayan calendar having to do with the pouring out of water, and with all the flooding and things that are going on. I just find it's really interesting, and it's just I didn't know what this whole thing meant back in '91 when I was told that there was going to be a flood. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying it's going to be a worst case, or I don't necessarily agree with Pope John Paul, or I just don't know.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a quick question.
I just know the Hopi elders. They just said, try to get up in the mountains and forest, and you'll be safer there than you will down lower.
So let me ask you a question. With everything that you know, real fast, are you preparing and planning?
Yeah. I've just finished putting in 12 4-foot square foot gardens out in the front yard, and I'm planting fruit trees. And when I'm choosing my fruit trees, my teacher Zula Brinkerhoff took her Hopi dad down to choose a tree. He came up to Salt Lake, and you can have any tree you want to. And he chose the little teeniest tree, and so I kind of learned how to choose fruit trees, and always choose the big one. And
okay,
trees. I've got a year's supply of food put in recently from Wise Food Storage, and which was a good deal. And yeah, I'm getting ready. I didn't think I was going to be able to get ready, but it's happened that way.
There you go. Well, hey, Will, we're up on time here. We're at the end of the show, and this has been fun, and we have found some real interesting little nuggets. Thanks for that translation on the destroyer. And he's going to be talking about the Blue Star Kachina prophecy and other Native American prophecies. And I think that this is a real important thing for us to dive into because, well, as I've shown in my video, that the Hopi prophecy, the folklore, is a living folklore. And it's not something where we're discovering old wisdom texts that have been unearthed after hundreds or thousands of years. But this is a living tradition, and it's one that's faithfully carried on. And I think it makes it very, very powerful. And so tonight we're going to have a really good in-depth conversation. And for those of you who want to join in and you've got questions, and I hope you do, also for those of you who got a question, we've got Susan, and she's in our virtual studio there in the chat room, and just make sure that she knows you're there and she's got your question, and she'll get it on so that we can go ahead and get your questions answered. And so with that, I'm bringing on our guest, Will, and welcome to YA Radio.
Osio Ginili Tehiju, which in Cherokee means, hello, cousins, I'm fine, how are you?
In Turkey.
There you go.
So you're Native American and you speak Turkish?
No, that's Cherokee.
Oh, that's Cherokee. I'm sorry. It sounded like you said Turkey. I just caught the tail end of that.
I talk too fast sometimes.
You must be from New York.
But speaking of talking turkey, we're going to be doing a lot of that tonight.
I really like it.
So you weren't wrong after all.
Hey, there we go. First off, I wanted to ask you, did you get a chance to review that video we put up on Comet Elenin?
Yeah, it was interesting.
Okay. As you were watching it, and just so that listeners know, there's some update on it, and actually I'm fixing to write an article on this, but an astronomer down in Australia has made the claim that the comet is disintegrating.
Yeah, I read that.
Well, he says that, and a lot of folks are happily quoting him, but spaceweather.com quoted his article, and they said, well, that's unexpected, and this is possible disintegration, so they're not sold on it. And the fact is, he is an amateur astronomer. He doesn't have any corroborating imagery from anyone else to back his position or his allegations. And two is, I've noticed with this fellow, he's really
excuse me for saying it, but he's just got a grudge, it seems, with those of us that have taken what they believe to be an unusual interest in a wimpy comet.
Yeah.
But the fact is, when you dig into it, and this is just, it's indicative of the whole story and the thing that for professional researchers like us, I'm not a professional, excuse me, I'm too honest for that.
We'll call ourselves yeomen.
Yeomen.
Yeah, right.
I like that. Beam me up, baby. And so as yeomen researchers and folks that are just looking at it, we start tracking it back and you go back to source and then you see where these things evolve. The disinformation is ripe. It doesn't matter where you're at in any direction. It just keeps on going there. And I'm sure you've probably seen a huge amount of disinformation about Native American prophecy on this as well.
Oh yeah, it just doesn't matter. Anybody that gets involved in this gets slammed every way you can imagine, and it's not something I would have chosen. It's not a path I would have chosen. And I mean, even Mad Bear Anderson, who was just revered, founder of the Native American American Indian movement and the spiritual movement that started it. I mean, there's some people accuse him of being a witch, so it all comes down to jealousy.
Yeah.
I found in life that, when I was a kid in school, I just couldn't understand why everybody didn't like me, because I liked everybody. And, what can you say? It's, and I've done a lot of things. I've been a lot of places, and by the time I was 21, people looked at my resume and they said, they just couldn't believe all the stuff I'd done by then, so, and then it's just been packing more on top of it. So, there's some people that are aware and out there and doing stuff and got their ears on, and there's others that have their heads buried, So, anyway, so that we're just trying to wake a few people up. You can't wake everybody up. I've been on the quixotic, impossible quest now for quite a while, and I heard a story years ago about an old Jewish rabbi who, when he got out of seminary, he wanted to convert the world, and by the time he was middle-aged, he thought he'd be lucky if he converted his own family, and by the time he was getting ready to die, he wondered whether he was going to convert himself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand. It's getting of course, then again, a lot of people don't realize Judaism probably would have wound up becoming the dominant religion of the earth.
Yeah.
Except for one small question that really just blew it. You know what that question was?
Go ahead.
Okay. Wait, let me get this. I gotta cut off the end of my what? This is before my friend.
There was back in those days, before the Sinai Covenant, there was a place for people that didn't want to cut off of their end of their what. Mm-hmm. They were called God-fearers, and this is the reason why there was a court of the Gentiles around the Jerusalem temple. And these people then and even now today, there are people that have ID cards. If you're in Israel, you're either ID cards either stamped Jew, Arab, or Noahide. And Noahides are people who are allowed to sojourn in the land, and they only consisted of 7 commandments, and they were the only commandments that were in effect before Sinai, and it's still a going thing, and it's becoming a worldwide thing again, and there's actually Arabs all over Israel that are signing up on this because their people remember the covenant with Noah, and we're going to be talking about floods and Noah tonight again, and so yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. But there's always been a place for people that didn't want to have any manscaping done and still hang around Israel.
Well, that's going to be a good news for folks living in San Francisco. They got that anti-circumcision thing on the ballot.
Yeah.
And we're all sitting here in California going, oh, my God, you got to be serious. But anyway, the upshot for, Elenin and Hopi prophecy and in general is wanted to get your basic take on it, high level, but also
take a moment for our listeners who are not perhaps familiar with your work to just talk about yourself and your background, where you come from, get a little background.
Well, this whole odyssey started for me, I want to say, when I was 16 years old, I was given my Cherokee genealogy by my great uncle. And my mother's people, 37 of them, tried to enroll during the Dawes enrollment period in 1896, and because they didn't live in Oklahoma, they were rejected. But back in those days, the only people that claimed to be Indians were Indians. Now that's one of my mother's line. That's my mother's father's line, and my mother's line. I'm a descendant of Matoaka, also known as Pocahontas, and my seventh great grandfather, I found out in later years, was the war chief of the Cherokee Nation, Speaker of the Council, and I just found out recently he also was the custodian of the Cherokee's Ark. We had an Ark. We had records that were engraven on metal plates, and Joseph Smith heard about them and even came down to Missouri investigating. But the whole thing started, I guess, I don't know, about 19. I've always been interested in prophecy. My dad thought my mom was psychic, and his mom apparently had some kind of gift, and Dad kind of shied away from it and thought it was kind of spooky. But I always paid attention to prophecies and kind of collected them, kept them in the back of my mind. And
at what age did you begin doing this?
Well, in 1983 or so, I woke up out of a dream, and I just heard the word. And of course, back in those days, I was active in the LDS Church. I converted to it in '77. I've since left it because they have left the Book of Mormon. But anyway, don't want to get into a doctrinal thing there, but I woke up, I heard a voice say...
Oh, boy, we're going to get mail on that one.
That's okay. I'll refer people to the website. But anyway, and it's not mine, but I just heard a voice say, when you turn 30 years old and have been in the church for 7 years, something very important will happen. Well, I turned 30 December of '84, and the following spring, I was in the Salt Lake County Library. I used to devour everything I possibly could. I was a voracious reader in Mormon history and Mormon lore, everything I could get my hands on. And most people just kind of joined the church and just kind of checked their brains at the door and didn't do much reading. But it's that way in every church. And people usually are happy just to listen to what their leaders tell them. But I was a badger. I was a ferret. I dug stuff out. And anyway.
Oh my God! You think for yourself.
Well, yeah, right. Well, and
okay.
I was in the Salt Lake County Library, and the city library pretty much expunged anything that wasn't on the approved reading list. And I went through the stacks and looking for something new, and I've been doing it for 10 years, so there wasn't a whole lot more. Or 7 years, there wasn't much that was new. But after I got down to the end of the usual books and titles, I found a whole section of books with titles that I didn't recognize and authors' names I didn't recognize. And one book jumped out at me. I can remember it vividly. It was just about the almost below eye level, and it was called Keys of the Priesthood Illustrated by Bishop, Lynn and Stephen Bishop, and it was published by Review and Preview Publishers. And I picked the book up and opened it up, and it wasn't a publisher that I started to put it back. Long story made short, and this little voice in my head just said, "Read that book," and I started putting it back on the shelf. It was like there was a voice screaming inside my head, "Take that book home and read it." So I did, and I read it, and my wife also read it. It's information we'd been looking for years. During that period of time, Leonard Arrington, who was the LDS historian at the time, had opened up the archives to anybody that wanted to come in, and it was only for a brief window of time that people could actually go to the LDS archives. And I checked in. As far as the church was concerned, it wasn't an apostate work. It was a controversial work. And the upshot of it was, it pointed out that in 1906, in 2 Nephi chapter 3, it had been footnoted for many, many years until 1906 that there would be a future Indian prophet or seer that the church was to look for. Joseph Smith was looking for this guy. Brigham Young was looking for this guy. Joseph Smith, before his death, was told, and this is in the Mormon Doctrine and Covenants that every good Mormon carries to church. He asked, well, when am I going to see you again, Lord? And the Lord said, trouble me no more on this, but if you live to be 85 years of age, you'll see me again. Well, he died when he was like 39, but his 85th birthday was the last week of December of 1890, and that was about 4 or 5 days before the massacre at Wounded Knee, and the massacre at Wounded Knee happened because, the story goes, Jesus visited Walker Lake, Nevada, the Indian Reservation, which is about 250 miles west of, 300 miles west of Salt Lake, near Carson City, ordained apostles there. Big story. A military reservation, surrounded by soldiers with telegraph. There was a wild excitement that went on. People all over the East Coast were excited about it, and all this information was written up in the Boston Globe. And my friend Robert Ghostwolf actually went into the bowels of the Globe a few years ago before he passed away and discovered things that were never published at large. So that prophecy was fulfilled, and one of Joseph Smith's plural wives had followed Brigham Young to Salt Lake, and she wrote a letter to the editor of one of the Salt Lake papers saying, look, this prophecy was fulfilled. And there was this, by that time, by 1880 or so, the church was just so tired of, they wanted to join the world, and they wanted to put a lot of things behind them, and that was the year of the manifesto. And it was a real